And good afternoon from Philadelphia. Frank here with another edition of UFO News Network Sunday today on a Wednesday, I'm pretty sure it is. So we've got a special guest today, and my co-host, as usual, Chant is going to bring him on and tell the folks all about him. So go ahead, Chant, take it away.
Yes, we have a very special show today. The topic is really unusual. I don't know of any talk show that has done this topic, and that is covering the topic of extraterrestrials and violence or nonviolence towards them, or they to us. We have a special guest on today to cover this topic with us. His name is Dr. Michael Paul Masters. He's a professor of biological anthropology at Montana Tech in Butte, Montana, where he is researching hominin evolutionary anatomy, archaeology, biomedicine, astrobiology, and the physics of time and time travel. He has spent over 2 decades carefully examining the possibility that the UFO phenomenon may be best explained as our distant human descendants, returning from the future to study us in their own hominin evolutionary past. After receiving a PhD in anthropology from the Ohio State University in '09, where he specialized in hominin evolutionary anatomy, modern human variation, archaeology, and biomedicine, Dr. Masters spent the following decade developing a broad academic background that unites multiple scientific disciplines with the aim of elucidating a currently unexplained phenomenon. Remaining vigilant in his own skepticism, Dr. Masters continues this research with the intent of initiating informed dialogue about UFOs via an abductive method of inquiry that is firmly rooted in science and the principle of parsimony. Dr. Masters' nonfiction science book, Identified Flying Objects, a multidisciplinary scientific approach to the UFO phenomenon, challenges readers to consider new possibilities while cultivating conversations about our ever-evolving understanding of time and time travel. Welcome, Dr. Michael P. Masters, to our show.
Oh, thank you so much. It's great to be here.
We're so glad to have you. Do you mind just sharing a little bit about your background? What gave you the impetus or the inclination to even study the unusual types of subjects that you cover in your life?
It started with an early childhood experience, not my own. Unfortunately, I've never seen a UFO or had an experience with any sort of alien encounter. But my father did, and I remember him talking about it, and it sort of piqued my interest around age 8, actually. And I just sort of started a lifelong journey to understand as much about this phenomenon as possible.
This is a really unusual topic we're going to cover today. I wanted to kind of cover a little bit about the sociological and psychological perspectives also. I just wanted to also cover a little bit about Butte, Montana, where you live, and how absolutely stunning it is out there. My understanding, when I looked it up on Wikipedia, is that it is a county seat of Silver Bow County, Montana, and the city has quite a rich history to it. It was established in 1864 as a mining camp in the northern Rocky Mountains of the Continental Divide, and it experienced rapid development in the late 19th century. Can you tell us a little bit more about your area and the industries involved how do people make it out there? What's the economy?
Yeah, no, it's a really interesting town historically. It's even today it has one of the largest historical districts in the U.S. Simply because of the mining heritage. We have these big structures called head frames or gallows frames that used to be used to lower the miners underground and also to pull up all of the rock ore that they mined. And they're all lit up with these vibrant lights now at night, and it's a really interesting place. The mining heritage continues. Mining's still a part of the economy here, but in the 1980s, the large mine closed down, and we've sort of been in this reshuffling, this re-economic development ever since. And now it's a pretty diversified economy. We have a lot of engineering. We have the university here where I teach, and just a lot of industry business coming in. It's really a vibrant community. I mean, there used to be 100,000 people here during the height of the mining boom. We mined most of the copper for electricity. And today it's a very small part of the economy, but we still really embrace that heritage, that the really deep-rooted mining heritage of the past.
It also has, in popular culture, a lot of interesting aspects to it regarding film and television. Butte, Montana has appeared in numerous films, and actually quite a few, too many to list here. And then also regarding the domain of literature. It has a rich history as well. I wanted to go over how, for generations now, in the state of Montana, and I know a few people from Montana myself, and by the way, that is an absolutely gorgeous state.
It is, yeah.
They have talked about how they rely on hunting in order to survive. There's a lot of people out there, I have come across them myself, they cannot seem to fathom the idea that people actually pick up a gun and they go hunting for animals to survive. Can you let us know a little bit more, give us some insight as to why people would use guns in order to survive in Montana?
Well, it's not just guns. A big part of the hunting culture out here is bow hunting. I consider myself first and foremost a bow hunter. And then when bow season ends, if I haven't filled the freezer, I'll dust off the gun and go out and try to meet our quota. It's pretty much the main way we get meat to survive out here as well. I mean, obviously we could go to the store and buy it, but a lot of why we do it is just issues with the meat industry, the way animals are treated, how dirty it is, how they feed them ground up animal parts, and causes problems with prion diseases like mad cow disease is a common example. Internationally now we have an international meat industry that, there's fewer regulations, there's fewer checks and balances. When the government was shut down, there wasn't really food inspection happening. So there's some comfort in knowing that this animal, and don't get me wrong, I hate that killing aspect of it. It's just a terrible thing to watch the life go out of the eyes of another living creature. But knowing that animal is going to feed my family for the entire year, and many of my friends' families as well through trades and other things that happen after hunting season. It takes, and knowing also that if we were just buying meat from the store, another animal died at the hands of somebody else. So I think it's a noble thing. I'm a member of the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation. I hunt deer and elk primarily. I don't hunt for sport. I just hunt for meat. And that's honestly, you could say that about the vast majority of Montana residents. It's a culture out here where it's not, for many people it is survival. It's how they get their food, but it's also just really a way to honor where we live, and there's, it's bountiful. There are a lot of elk in the mountains of Montana right now, and they rely on us to hunt them. It's part of the management process as well.
Is trapping part of that equation as well?
It is, yeah. That one's a little more contentious. But yeah, trapping, I mean, a lot of the earliest settlers in this area and all throughout the Rocky Mountain front were fur trappers. And that still continues today. It's not as prominent as if you go north through Canada and into Alaska, but it's still a big part of the culture here, yeah.
You talk about some contention over it. What is the cause of that? Just the way the animal ends up dying, or?
Yeah, I mean, it's that. It's also we also have a huge network of public trails, and people take their dogs on them, and occasionally a dog will step in a trap, and that's a big part of the contention is just the dogs getting hurt.
Wanted to cover also how the person I spoke to who is a hunter, and by the way, the people I'm speaking to, I don't interview people regarding this topic who go hunting for sport. I'm only interviewing people who do it to survive. So I'd like to delineate that for people so they understand that. That's just my personal preference. But regarding who I interview, the folks I spoke to who were from Michigan said the areas they're in become dense with deer, densely populated, and they will die a horrible death if they are not shot
Right.
And that's just the reality of it. And when they shoot them, they do it in the most respectful manner, out of a deep honor to nature. And that's also, I think, an important point, that a lot of these animals will go hungry, and there's an overpopulation problem going on. I wanted to know, how do you feel about that?
Yeah, there's a couple issues at play there. One is taking the predators out of the equation. Out here, we still have grizzly bears, black bears, wolves, coyotes, mountain lions, and they take a share of the elk and the deer. But even with those predators here, which to be honest scares the crap out of me a lot of times when I'm by myself deep in the backcountry, I'm always looking over my shoulder for grizzlies. But even with those predators here and pretty strong numbers, we still have huge populations of elk and deer that need to be managed. I mean, it's weird to think about humans in this conservation management role, but we've gotten to the point where without us, there's not just problems of overpopulation and food shortages, but there's also disease. Diseases can spread very quickly through these herd populations. Out here specifically, it's something called chronic wasting disease, which just causes the animal to become really weak and frail, and they die this slow, painful death. And it's the same in other parts of the country as well. So yeah, humans and our forest management agencies play a very important role in managing these natural resources.
I think it's undeniable also how kids who are learning how to survive through their family, it's really important they get those kind of skill sets. I understand that you teach your children how to survive. Is that true?
It is, absolutely. We have a family membership to a bow range just outside of town. They have big 3D targets set up, and it's kind of like a golf course where you hike up and through the mountains and different ravines, and there'll be little 3D targets set up. And I've been taking my children out there since they could hold a bow, basically. And it's not just about teaching them the skills that you need, because it's very difficult. A lot of people think, oh, it's not fair. People are just going out and mowing down animals with guns. No, it's even with a gun, even during rifle season, you have to be very aware of your smell and take great precautions to cover up your own smell, wash with specific soaps, use specific laundry detergents, spray all your clothes down with a scent masker, and so on and so forth. Stalking, knowing wind direction, all of these things can make or break your hunt. And those are important things to teach children at a young age. But even beyond that, one thing we focus on, and a lot of other hunters I know do this as well, is to focus on honoring the animal, honoring its life. When I bring home a deer and elk to hang in my garage, the first thing I do is bring the kids out, and we say thank you to the animal for that sacrifice. And they help with the processing of the meat and packaging, freezing, labeling. So it really is a family affair, and it's one of the best feelings in the world when you come home with this large animal and your kids give you a big hug and just happy to have this bountiful resource that really does feed us throughout the entire year.
And Mike, that sounds like a little bit of a Native American influence there with the honoring of the animal afterwards.
Well, I think most cultures that really live in harmony with nature honor nature in a different way. And since we've separated our food procurement from that actual interaction with nature, when you go to the store and buy it and it's just red meat, you don't see the animal, and
I do thank the cashier,
Yeah, absolutely. and it's not just here. Like when I lived in France, it was the same thing. They would have a picture of the cow at the boucherie that you'd go to buy your meat, and you would see the animal that you got it from. We just had this meat shop open up only a few blocks from where I live, where the guy knows the animals personally. He goes there and he gets them, and they don't send them off to process them. It's one of the largest what he calls kill houses in Montana, because they bring the animal there, they do all of the slaughtering and processing themselves, and they know the ranchers, they know the animals, they've worked with them, and that kind of that's really comforting for people out here. Is we want to know if we're getting meat that's not meat we got ourselves. We want to know where it came from, that it's clean, that it's not being shipped over to China to be processed and sent back to us. And that's there's a very big market for that here, and I think there's a lot of other places in the U.S. like that as well.
The hunters I spoke to told me, just as you actually covered so well, how they go through great lengths to hide themselves, not only through attire or whatever they can afford, but also, setting themselves up ahead of time in the forest to go to that area later, to sit in a tree, to continue their hunting. But they go through great lengths through scent. One hunter I spoke to said he actually puts his hunting clothes in a garbage bag for a week in order to attain the kind of scent he feels he needs in order to camouflage himself, because the last thing he wants is a human scent on him in the woods. He also mentioned that's why they sell things like urine. These things are all familiar to you. Can you go into that a little bit?
Oh yeah, it's a process. My wife actually bought some it's like some OxyClean detergent or something and didn't tell me. And I washed all of my hunting clothes with it the day before I was going out, and I didn't know what to do. I mean, it smelled so strongly, and it's meant to. A lot of people like that, and especially stinky people, I assume. But it was a huge negative for what I was trying to do. So I had to go through all of my old hunting clothes and try to find things that I could wear, and then those I put outside for about a week, washed them again, and some scent-free stuff. And no, it's a huge part of it. These animals can smell tremendously well, and while that may be a good thing, if you have a scent, and you don't want bears to come up and eat you, it can be good in that respect. But the deer and the elk and or if you are hunting bears or other animals with really big noses that can smell very well, it's definitely a problem. And we spend a lot of time really managing scent, putting up blinds. I personally can't hunt from a tree or a blind because I get really bored. And I end up just typing on my phone or something, and then an animal walks by and I never see it. So I'm out there actively, hiking around, stalking, just tracking. But yeah, that's a really important part of it. And in many places, that's definitely the best way to do it. But out here in Montana, you don't see a lot of tree stand hunting or blind hunting the same way you do in the Midwest.
The last thing I want to cover before I go straight into the questions with you is how hunters use all their senses, including intuition, to detect danger or something out of place around them in the woods, and how animals do use that too. The hunter I spoke to said this. He said, when there's something not right, one of the things he notices is not just his own intuition telling him there's something not right or out of place in the woods, whether he's hunting or not. It's when the animals act strange or their behavior is odd. How do you, can you give us a little bit of insight regarding that?
Yeah, squirrels and birds especially. They're up high. They see things before we do. I've had many squirrels blow out my own hunt. If I stop in an area and I'm watching a little ravine or something and a squirrel sees me, they just go nuts. They're throwing stuff at me. They're chattering really loudly, and I have to move because they're warning other animals that I'm there. But yeah, you can also listen to them for warnings about other things that may be around you as well.
Just to jump in with a little anecdote, we had Hurricane Sandy here in the east a few years back, and when we knew it was coming, you could see the difference in the behavior of the squirrels, so no doubt about it. They knew something was up, and they were barking their heads off for sure.
Earthquakes too. We have earthquakes out here from time to time. One shook the hell out of us last year. It scared the crap out of me. 3 a.m. I think it was like a 5.9 or 6.2 or something like that. But yeah, the animals they're aware of it. The aftershocks, especially. I could see my dogs and cats really, even before it would happen. They have a sense of these things that we don't.
The hunter I spoke to, by the way, and there were multiple ones, one of them was in his 90s and he spoke very softly, so you'll need to correct me on the data he gave me. It's one or the other, but he said, and you'll see why I'm asking this question in a bit, but he said most hunters use rifles In other states, not shotguns. And he's from Michigan, by the way. But he went on to say that 12 gauge is usually used for big game, and then for smaller game. And then he went on to say, by the way, regarding big game shotguns or rifles, are 30-06, 30-06, 30-30s, 308s. And then for smaller game, they use 20 gauge and 410s. Can you give me, obviously I'm not educated about guns in this respect. Can you tell me what kinds of guns people use for big game and for small game?
Well, out here, yeah, we're allowed to use rifles because, things are so far apart and people are farther apart. But you're right, in the Midwest, they mostly use a slug within a 12 gauge slug, one of the higher calibers you can get. But no, out here I use a 30-06. It's one of the largest caliber rifles. It's heavier. It's got a bigger kick. It's louder, but again, in honoring the animal, you want to make sure it doesn't suffer. So knowing that you're getting a good, clean shot with a high-powered rifle, usually, the animal just drops right there. So I appreciate that about where I live, is knowing that you have the opportunity to use a weapon that won't cause any suffering and can just, do it as quickly and painlessly as possible.
Wanted to ask you about the topic of extraterrestrials landing on our planet. I happen to believe, I just want to share this with yourself and the audience, that extraterrestrial civilizations have been visiting our planet for eons. I think an eon is a million years, but I think they've been visiting our planet for millions, hundreds of millions of years. And I think there's any number of them, that there's countless different types. Wanted to ask you if you haven't found, if you secretly spy an extraterrestrial presence abducting people deep in the woods, whether you're hunting or not, and do you go run and protect your family, or do you strategize how to help those being abducted? Or perhaps you have a different plan in mind. Again, if you secretly spy an ET presence deep in the woods, going through the throes of having abducted people, in other words, they already have them and they're bringing more onto their ship and it's landed there in the forest, what do you do? And they have not detected you.
I'd probably go help them, to be honest.
And when you say them, you mean the people, is that right?
No, I mean the extraterrestrials that are picking them up. I see them as people too, just simply people from our future doing research into the past. So I mean, in all of these reports you see, we're talking about people abducting people just from different times. And I know, the dominant worldview is that they're coming from a different planet. There's many, many reasons why it seems more likely that they are simply us from the future. One of the big parts about it, look at the structure, look at the form of these alien beings. They have the same characteristics as the people they're abducting. They have big heads, small faces, 2 arms, 2 legs, 5 fingers on each one. They're shaped the same way. They have technology very similar to our own, but obviously more advanced. So there's many reasons to think that they're simply conducting research into the past, and based on what they do in these abduction reports, it very much mimics what I would do as a modern anthropologist if I was going back in time and studying people as well. And if they were picking them up and harvesting their organs or something, absolutely, I'd go try to intervene in that case. Or if they were like spider creatures or something, but they're not. And every single abduction account, they're describing bipedal, upright, walking humanoid forms who don't hurt us in any way. In fact, they go out of their way to tell us, no harm will come to you, and they try to immobilize us to keep us from doing something that could be seen as dangerous, and they try to wash their memory clean. It's a very common thing in abduction reports as well, is to try to give them a clouded memory, probably to help with the psychological pain that comes with such a traumatic experience. So no, this probably isn't a very common response, but I don't see anything wrong with what they're doing. And in fact, it's probably very important for their own knowledge acquisition and their own scientific studies in the future. So I would either just observe or, if given the opportunity, try to become a part of the research expedition in our time.
I'm glad you brought up the topic of a futurist, futurist topic regarding aliens from the future. As you know, Jim Peniston and many others believe in that kind of theory. Also, it's funny. You actually touched on a topic, because right after this I was going to ask you about ancient aliens, the theory, and aliens from the future, but you already covered it. I did have two questions regarding what you just said. You said a very interesting term that is not necessarily commonly known in ufology, and I'd love for people to know more about it. And it's not actually a term that I can say very well. I think you said can you say it again, because I'm not good at saying it?
Yeah, extraterrestrial. It just replaces the Latin root ter, meaning earth, with tant, meaning time, which is a common word in French, Spanish, other Latin language derivatives. So I feel that it's a more accurate term for what these individuals are, rather than being from outside Earth. I see them as being from a time in our future, still right here on planet Earth, in the same way that we're moving around in the same space as people 100,000 years ago, 2 million years ago, and so on. They're likely still here on this planet, just at a time in the future that post-dates are present.
It's interesting because the free organization that Renario Hernandez is helping to run, I think it's the Edgar Mitchell organization, they actually don't like using the term UFO. They think it's a materialist term. And they have different terms regarding, terminology regarding the subject we're covering. So it just seems like different folks involved in the realm of ufology all have terms unique to their own perspectives. I'm glad you're able to bring up this term so we can all learn about it. Now, you said something that's really important I wanted to hone in on. You said if they were, that you would intervene regarding this scenario if you felt that humans were actually being used in a manner that was unacceptable to you. If you needed to do that and they were being harmed in a brutal manner, what would you do with your gun in hand?
I would put my gun down first and foremost, and probably try to advocate for scientific ethics. To be honest, we have something called the Institutional Review Board, where as researchers we're required to adhere to a code of ethics. And if that wasn't being followed, I mean, I'm under the impression that it still exists in the future based on the way in which this research is carried out, based on numerous abduction reports that I've investigated over the years. But in a situation where it wasn't, perhaps it's far enough in the future that they don't really see our humanity as much. And it's easy to do. If you and I and Frank went back and picked up somebody from 200 years ago, it's very easy to see their humanness, and we may even be able to communicate with them rather easily. But going back 5 million years into the past, now we're starting to get into a morphological form that looks much more like the common chimpanzee today. And you go back 30 million years and you're looking at something more akin to a macaque that we unfortunately do perform a lot of very negative biomedical experiments on. So I don't know, perhaps it's that temporal distance between us that makes some difference, but honestly, it really does seem from these abduction reports that they are attempting to be ethical. If that weren't the case, or like I said, if it was some sort of octopus monster or spider creature, I'd start laying down some fire. Probably, I'd lay down, put my rifle on my bag, and start taking some accurate shots from a distance as long as I could.
I'm going to go back to that in a bit because I have another question, but I have another question for you that you may have already answered, but I still want you to touch on it a little bit, and that is, you have found an area deep in the woods where ETs have a craft. They are working, they have a craft, it's landed, and they are busy working on collecting data for their own research. You know this because they've telepathically related to you, and they've also let you know telepathically they don't want any trouble. You just so happen to have your gun in hand. What are you going to do?
Well, I'm really hoping that happens in a couple of months, to be honest. I have a former student who is a hunting guide on a ranch that is part of an area known as Red Gate. They made a documentary film about it back in, I think, 2005. But it's not far from here. It's only about a half hour from where I live, around an area called Deer Lodge, Montana. But this Red Gate area has been a hot spot of UFO activity for decades, and it's very well known that there's constantly what I refer to as IFOs, because I also don't like the term UFO. IFOs, extraterrestrial sightings all over this area. In fact, my former student puts game cameras or camera traps out all over this area, to aid in they're bringing guests out to the hunting lodge. And he sent me a picture. He captured one of the weirdest looking things I've ever seen on a game camera and sent it to me. It's just this very sort of cryptid, extraterrestrial type form. But what was interesting about it is that these camera traps are set up to take 3 very rapid pictures right in a row in sequence. And that weird form was only on one of them. It was in the frame and then just instantly disappeared. But he's taken me out there in a couple of months to this Red Gate area. It's now under private ownership. Unfortunately, it's happening with a lot of public land around Montana. It's getting swallowed up by private owners, but he still has access to it since he works there, and he's going to take me up. So hopefully we come across some extraterrestrials and their IFO, and they're like, hey, we're doing stuff over here. Don't shoot us. If it's possible for me to communicate telepathically back to them, I'd say, sweet. Can I get a ride? Can you give me a tour of your craft? I think that would be awesome. And honestly, talking about this so much with my wife and children over the years, I think if I was with them, they'd be on board too. Honestly, they don't have a fear of these aliens. They don't have this sense that they're extraterrestrial. They have a sense that they're just us in the future. So understanding the phenomenon that way takes a lot of these fear aspects out of it. And looking back at Orson Welles's rebroadcast of H.G. Wells's The War of the Worlds in the 30s, I think it was 38 maybe, it was a very different reaction. And even today I think a lot of people would still be very freaked out if that situation you just described happened. But me, my family, our friend group, people I hunt with, I think we would probably approach them and introduce ourselves and be very friendly.
There's I don't know why it's happening to me right now, but I actually remembered right before the show the name of a case where and Frank will probably chime in and let us know the name of the case, I'm hoping. But there was a frog-like creature that came out of a craft in front of a few people. They witnessed it, and it was this massive-looking frog or toad. And I think it happened in the 50s, the 40s or the 50s. It's a famous case. And they said he was not bothering anybody, and he just, then I think he got back in his craft and took off. I have to check on that, but I know that creature was spied by multiple witnesses. My point here is nature has different kinds of creatures. As you know, in the ocean, there's probably countless creatures that all look different from one another. And on the surface of the planet, there's different looking kinds too. And if you look at them, they're really weird looking. Recently, I think we've seen through the years creatures that have come out of the ocean and landed, and they just are probably creatures that we haven't seen for supposedly millions of years, and or we thought they were extinct. What I'm getting at here is when you said if a creature looks different than, say, a human, that you would consider violence against it. What about the fact that there's creatures on the planet, more creatures that don't look human, and the possibility of ETs that may look like those creatures coming here? What would you do then if you were faced with that?
Well, I think it's important to acknowledge something in what you said, too, is that the creatures on this planet don't look like us. There's very, very few of them, and there's billions of life forms on this planet, but we're the only one that is upright walking, that's pentadactyl, that can grasp with their hands, that's relatively hairless, that has the ability to even have these conversations, to talk about these things. So the rarity of that form here on Earth, looking at another solar system, looking at another planet with a different atmosphere, different chemical composition, different gravity, different distance from its own sun, and all of the other things that make up the physical properties of that planet, make it even less likely that we would get something like us there as well. It's so rare here, it seems very improbable that it would also happen there in the exact same way it did on this planet, or that they could find us, or that they could travel here, or that they would travel all the way here and then just perform these covert medical examinations on us without any formal contact. So yeah, if it was a very different looking thing, and I obviously feel pretty strongly about this. I spent the last 7 years writing a book about this, and I feel quite confident that this phenomenon can best be explained as future humans engaging in research into the past. But if I was wrong, if that IFO came down in front of me and a giant toad creature got out, yeah, it'd be a very different interaction. My family would stop approaching it and probably run the other direction as fast as possible. Right. But I don't think that would happen. I honestly don't. And those reports exist, and there's the more insect-like creatures, the more reptilian-like creatures, which I think is just an aspect of a longer period of future evolution, and obviously more differences in our temporal ancestry because of that. But yeah, that would be a moment of reckoning for me. Absolutely, that I would need to think, what do I do now? Because I was wrong. But I honestly don't think that's the case.
Great. The movie industry has spent billions of dollars covering the topic we're talking about now, regarding aliens and violence, or aliens and nonviolence. A few are Star Wars, Alien, E.T., Star Trek, Terminator. Then there's also a really interesting film I recommend people consider watching. It's called 10 Cloverfield Lane, which is a science fiction psychological horror film. Without giving it away, it's about a woman who's captive in a survivalist bunker. He claims to have saved her from an alien-related apocalyptic attack. What I was going to ask you is, do you feel or do you think that the culture that the movies have, the movie industry has helped to create regarding ETs is accurate?
Well, it's quite an interesting mix among those. I think you could add Gremlins to the list too, another Steven Spielberg movie about aliens.
And there's plenty of high-profile, more positive contact type movies that are out there as well. So
yeah, definitely.
I think more of them lean towards the conflict-related, but not all of them. And the ones that are very good, Close Encounters, 2001, Contact. E.T. Starman is another one that...
Starman. I loved that movie. Jeff Bridges. He lives out here in Montana, actually.
Yeah. I think the area does kind of attract some people from the show business industry. I guess they just want to kind of get away from it all and get out of Southern California. But there's a balance there, and I wish we'd see more of them. I wish we'd see more of those type movies. But they are out there, so they do provide some check or some balance to the more conflict-related contact movies.
Yeah, and I remember actually when I first started talking about this book, I was contacted by someone who wrote and produced the first film for sci-fi that was actually about time-traveling humans from the future coming back and abducting us and their past. So we had a lot to talk about in that regard. But yeah, that's another film. I can't remember the name of it right offhand, but there's definitely some out there that do show a different side of things. There's a show on right now called The Orville, actually, that shows pretty meaningful interactions among very humanoid, some exactly human, living on moons of different solar systems, but a very, amenable interaction, very cordial interactions among them. But yeah, there's definitely, and that's probably just an aspect of the entertainment industry, that you're going to sell more tickets if you have these epic battles taking place, and there's, conflict and contention and different cultures, culture clash, among these different human species and human-like species. So yeah, I mean, I grew up with Starman. I grew up with E.T. and, this cute paedomorphic, big-headed, big-eyed alien is sort of how I grew up with it. I had the Atari game when it came out, and I always thought, it'd be great to give Reese's Pieces to these cute little aliens if I found them in the backyard. But no, I don't know. It was only recently that I got into Star Wars, and Gremlins scared the crap out of me as a kid, so I didn't really watch that too much. But yeah, there's a pretty interesting mix. Some we get along with them, some we're at war with them. But what's interesting is in almost every case, there tends to be this issue where, can we find a way as humanity to come together and fight this more sophisticated force, this more technologically advanced threat from outer space? And there's something to be said for that aspect of it too, that really seeing ourselves as one planet, seeing ourselves as Earth, and Earth against everybody, and we get divided. We're always at war with each other. A lot of that's an aspect of the military-industrial complex, and how much money they make and individuals and governments make by keeping perpetual war going, and the aerospace industry especially finding new ways to kill people, and we have to have a market for that. There has to be demand, so we create these wars. But if there was some sort of outside
it's those
threat,
scientists again. They're the ones who invent them.
Some scientists, not all, Frank. A lot of us, actually. I have a relative who works at a major, one of the big defense. Aerospace defense institutions here in the U.S. And when he took the job, he was very highly coveted. He's a great engineer. But when he took the job, he said, I will not work on anything that can be used to kill people. I'll work on defense. I'll work on any sort of defense systems, but nothing that could be used in an act of war. And there's a lot of people like that. But my point is that if this outside threat does exist, and we have to look inward, we have to look at what makes us Earth, and we construct the other through all of these meaningless differences. Your skin's slightly darker than mine, or your language is different, or your religion's different. But all of a sudden, we would forget all of those and really just come together to fight this outside threat as earthly humans against whatever this an alien invader was. So and I really enjoy that aspect of these films too. And there's a lot of those, Independence Day, the one with Tom Cruise.
Oh, they're fun movies to watch.
They're fun. They're super
movies.
Fun, and they're movies, But so yeah, there's a lot going on in those. And even though there is, the conflict with extraterrestrials, I think a lot of these do focus on our humanity and what makes us human, and how we would probably rally together if there was a major threat from a different solar system.
I do tend to think that the more positive contact movies provide the entertainment value, but also a little bit more food for thought, though. But that's just me.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think it's more about selling tickets and getting people some really awesome, special effects. But it does seem to be a running theme throughout many of them.
There was a really interesting case. I know you know about it, but I'm going to mention it to our listeners, and then I'll ask you a question. It's called the Pascagoula abduction, and it's a famous incident where Charles Hickson and Calvin Parker claimed they were abducted by aliens while they were fishing in Mississippi. It gained national attention, worldwide attention. Involved in that abduction were creatures who took them aboard the craft and then subjected them to an examination. And the creatures were floating through the air, and they were 8 to 10 I guess they were 8 to 10 feet high. What I wanted to also mention to you at the same time is another encounter that happened in Cisco County in 1964. Let me go ahead and just one sec. Sorry about the wait on this, gentleman. Just one second.
There are quite a few cases involving outdoorsmen. Travis Walton wasn't hunting, but he was out with a crew working on the trees. Parker and Hickson and Pascagoula were fishing. There's an Allagash case where I think they were canoeing and camping, but it does come up where the outdoorsmen do run into these types of things.
Yeah, it's very common.
And in this case, regarding the alien encounter in Cisco County in '64, I'll just give a little bit of background on it. This gentleman, he became separated from the rest of the group he was with, and with nightfall approaching, he decided to go ahead and sleep the night away in a tree for safety. And that didn't work out. He soon discovered that he had the company of ETs, and they didn't seem to be friendly either. They had a humanoid type of appearance, and the third was more robot-like. And I want to bring up that robot subject with you in a moment. He became panic-stricken, and they began to shake the tree that he was in order to dislodge him. In other words, they were not friendly. And then he recounts how he vividly recalls a white vapor being shot from the robot's mouth, which rendered him unconscious. He did come to where he was assaulted by these creatures, and he managed to load and shoot an arrow at the invaders, hitting the robot. And the direct hit caused a spark to fly, indicating that the arrow had hit a metallic surface. He managed to shoot 2 more arrows at the beings, each time causing the group to scatter. Soon a second robot joined the group, and again Shrum was rendered unconscious by the strange white vapor. The point and I won't read the rest of that, but if anybody wants to read about it, they just Google alien encounter in Cisco County, Cisco County in '64. It looks like there's not just humanoid creatures, but robots involved here. If you came across this kind of situation where somebody was being attacked by ETs and robots, what would you do, again, with gun in hand?
Yeah, that's a tough one. And the robot thing makes sense. We have them now. I think we're only about 10 years from having something that can make facial expressions that don't freak us out and can, speak in ways that don't freak us out. But our technology is moving very quickly in that direction. I definitely understand why there may be robot assistants involved in abductions in the future as well. Yeah, again, that's a rare case. There are reports of those, that there's more aggression on behalf of the abductors. I don't know. I mean, that's a tough one. If there were humanoids, future humans with robots, I don't know. I honestly don't know if I have an answer to that. I guess it's more situational. Probably even depends on if I had any coffee that morning or if I was in a bad mood or something, Like I may be like, he'll be all right. He's got his tree and just don't take a nap or something. But I don't know. I guess it really depends on the specifics of the situation I was involved in.
Great. I wanted to also bring up a case that you've heard of before, and I know, Frank, you have too. It's the Kelly Hopkinsville encounter. And if you want to read about that, listeners, please go to Wikipedia, check it out, or other resources available. But Kelly Hopkinsville, I'm going to spell that for you, because when I first heard it, and I heard that those words tumble out of somebody's mouth, I had no idea what they said. So it's Kelly -HOP as in Paul, KINSVILLE encounter. And that occurred in 1955, allegedly, where a family claimed a close encounter with ETs in Kentucky. And ufologists regard it as one of the most significant and well-documented cases in the history of UFO incidents. The claim is that on August 21st in 1955, 5 adults and 7 children arrived at the Hopkinsville police station claiming they had been attacked. What I was going to ask you is, do you feel like this incident was possible, that it actually occurred?
I don't know enough about that specific event to comment on it. I tend to err on the side of believing people in general, and I think it's a very important thing in studying this phenomenon. Obviously, some make more sense than others. Some fall within the average more than others, and again, the average is mostly not being harmed, being comforted during these interactions. But there are some where that's not the case. So, so yeah, I mean, I can't speak to why it might be a different situation for some of these people. It could be, a lack of ethics. It could be just bad people who have access to time travel technology as well. But no, those should all be considered. I think it's important to consider all of the evidence, especially with a phenomenon this complex and this mysterious. We should believe everyone's account. There's J. Allen Hynek had a good system of looking at the strangeness and probability, and I think that should still be used today. But we shouldn't just dismiss any account because it doesn't conform to what most of them do. So I think it's important to acknowledge those and to consider them, even if they do, and probably especially if they do deviate from the norm.
Wanted to be able to wind down this interview and keep Frank on for the duration of the show, but then also let you go because you have a schedule that you need to keep today. Wanted to let everybody know your website and also that you'll be on with us for a biographical interview. We wanted to learn more about you and everything you're working on. You're doing a lot of hard research and you have some wonderful material that you've published. On April 28th, Sunday at noon Eastern Time, we have you on. And we also wanted to let everybody know your website, which is idflyobj.com. That's idflyobj.com. And the book you just published Friday is Identified
Friday.
Flying Objects, a multidisciplinary scientific approach to the UFO phenomenon, where you had a book signing at Slancha Butte, Montana. Thank you so very much for having been on our show today, Doctor.
Thank you, Chant and Frank. It was great talking to you guys today.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, we'll get into the. We didn't have a chance to do it today, but we'll get into some of your criticisms of the scientific journal racket. And,
yeah, let's save that for
We'll
April.
get that for next time. Fantastic. Okay.
All right.
Thanks a lot, Doctor. Appreciate it.
Thank you. All right, talk to you later.
There we go.
Right. Yeah, Frank, actually, I was going to ask you later in the show, but I'll just ask you now, regarding the military-industrial complex and extraterrestrials having a relationship. Do you think that that's possible?
Well, it's possible, but I don't know it. I don't know that they have that, like a literal relationship. I think what we're getting and what we've gotten is a lot of curious questions, a lot. I don't think they know all that much. I don't believe, for example, that Eisenhower met with ETs and that they signed a treaty and all that. I don't believe that. I think that's just pure fantasy that's been introduced into the field, and some folks believe it. I do not happen to believe that. I think a lot of them are scratching their heads just the same way we are. So I think that's about where we're at with that. But hey, you never know. I could be wrong.
Yeah, he had a lot of really interesting things to say. I actually wanted to ask him another question about that incident regarding that family. As you know, Dean Aliato, who we interviewed, he did a movie on that incident, the Kelly Hopkinsville encounter. And the movie he had is called Alien Abduction Incident in Lake County. And he did that film decades ago, and Dr. Jacques Vallée said it was the most accurate perspective of an abduction, an alien abduction taking place in movies that he'd ever seen. Did you ever get a chance to check out that movie?
I watched both versions in preparation for our interview with Dean, and they're both good. They're both good in their own way. Obviously, the first one was very early in his career. It was something he put together basically with some friends, and just a sort of a first start into the making movie business. And that's really good in its own way. And the more higher profile, larger budget effort that he put together for, I think it was for UPN, That's entertaining as well. But me being kind of a low budget guy, I think I respect the first effort maybe a little bit more. They got a lot of bang for their buck, especially with the aliens and with the ship that they built. And he went into all that. That's a fun interview to listen to. And Dean also went into some detail for any fledgling content creators, that type of thing. Some very good advice just in terms of how to think about your project and a little bit on the technical end as well. So that's a real good interview to hunt down and go back into our archives and give a listen to.
Regarding that movie that he did that you saw, I know you saw both, but well, okay, in the original and the remake that he did, the original, by the way, just for our listeners to know, was in, I believe that was in 98. That was the remake, and then years earlier he had made the other film, which is it's essentially the same film. What I was going to ask you is, in either one of those films, do the humans turn to violence regarding the ETs, and did the ETs, were they violent against the humans?
No, as best as memory serves, I would say no.
Okay, I was just
Basically
curious.
the humans who were sort of cooperative, though, were sort of mind controlled. I think that was uh,
Oh, okay.
the implication in the film.
Yeah, also wanted to mention something that I didn't cover earlier, and that is the hunters I've interviewed have told me repeatedly that if aliens are coming to us in an interstellar fashion, and they are quite possibly millions of years ahead in their technology, what use is it going to be picking up a gun? How do you feel about that? What do you think about that perspective?
Probably no use at all. Probably no use at all. So,
Yeah, they balked actually when I talked to them about that. I thought it was interesting how they use that, they use a gun as a tool, but they would not turn to it whatsoever regarding an extraterrestrial presence. In fact, what they said was they would actually try to communicate with the ET presence. Um, did you ever get a chance to check out that movie Predator? By the way, I know it's a
oh,
classic.
sure, absolutely.
Well, in that movie, the reason I'm bringing up is because it's sort of the polar opposite of what we're talking about when you guys were mentioning sort of those Disney-like happy alien movies, or the movies where they expand your consciousness. You know, ETs are friendly and they're bringing knowledge to the planet. In this particular movie, Predator is actually the enemy and does
Well,
everything.
they're essentially hunters coming to Earth to sort of target and hunt down some of the more dangerous humans. In the original, it was guys involved in the military, paramilitary guys, and then in the sequel, they were hunting down drug dealers and police officers. So yeah, that was a fun little series, and definitely enjoyed it. But not my favorite type of alien contact film. But I
Well,
did
what I
like it
was
though.
Yeah, I actually liked it too. What I was going to ask you is regarding that science fiction action horror film Predator, which came out in '87. Do you think that made an impact on young people, like little kids, in the respect of becoming anti-ET, so to speak?
I don't know as far as little kids. Well, I guess little kids have gotten to see it. As I recall, it was an R-rated film with a pretty fair amount of violence. So I don't think it was
Yes.
a film that was really geared towards little kids. But these films run on TV, so I guess little kids do get to see them. I know it's a popular film. It's a well-liked film. I enjoyed it, but I'm not sure that it's really geared towards little kids.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's funny you say that because I grew up the way I grew up. I wasn't even allowed to watch MTV. So, and that was for kids, right?
Right, right,
But
right.
I actually had friends that were allowed to watch any kind of rating. You know, they could watch our movies, and they were like 9, and I don't know how they could do that. I was always so jealous of that they could get away with that.
Yep.
But yeah, I had friends that had watched like these crazy movies before we even went to middle school, and they were fine. Like they came out fine. They're productive members of society. They're not serial killers. There was that strange situation going on too, where I think members of Congress and a wife of a Congress member were trying to stop the music industry from being able to produce certain kinds of music because it appeared to be too violent.
Yeah, there aren't too many of the contact movies that get the R rating. I think that a lot of times they'll spend a little bit more money on them, so they make it a point to keep it at PG-13 to attract a larger audience.
Right.
There are a couple. Predator was one that I recall was rated R. The Thing, John Carpenter's remake of The Thing, was rated R. That was very heavy on the blood effects and the gore effects. So that is what I think pushed that into the R rating. That's a very good movie too, an excellent horror sci-fi movie. I think it's fair to say that a lot of these ET contact movies that delve over into the negative are essentially horror films where the ET is the monster, basically. They're monster movies, and ET's the monster. And then, of course, we've got the other films. Another one, a more positive contact movie I didn't mention, The Man Who Fell to Earth with David Bowie. That is one that came out in the 70s. Mission to Mars is kind of a sleeper favorite of mine. There's a contact element to that film, and that is a very entertaining film that not everyone's seen. I do recall mentioning it to Dean when we had him on. He said he had never seen it. I definitely recommend it for folks who've never seen it. It didn't get the attention I think it deserved. I think it was a much better movie than a lot of people give it credit for. I really enjoyed it, and when it does pop on the TV every now and again, I'll leave it on and watch it till the conclusion from wherever I picked it up. But I saw that film in the theater when it first came out. I enjoyed it. I thought it was a good movie.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up that movie. Before we wrap up the show here, wanted to mention one thing about that movie. The actress Mary Elizabeth Winstead, the star of that movie, she's actually in 10 Cloverfield Lane as the star of that movie, the one I mentioned earlier. The plot of The Thing, which is basically a research site going on in Antarctica and the discovery of an alien craft. And scientists going out there to research that area. That research team being faced with an ET presence. The interesting part of the film is this ET presence actually takes on the form of humans.
Yep.
And that's a completely different idea right there. We have movies that actually depict alien presence in their own form. And then we also have this movie, which is unique in this way. When you first saw the original, I love the original, by the way, and you saw the new one, which movie did you like better?
Well, the second one is a lot more impressive. I think the first one maybe is a little bit dated now, and that one was made in the very early 50s. It's a really good movie for its time. But the second one, I think, took things to another level, and it's a lot more intense, a lot better acted. The dialogue is a little bit more realistic, a little bit less stilted than you got back in the 50s. I think it is, and I'm not alone in this opinion. I think it's one of the best sci-fi horror movies ever made. It is a real corker. And I think at this point, not too many people haven't seen it, but if you never have, do go check it out. John Carpenter's remake of The Thing. Another thing I think is interesting about that movie is, yeah, they do sort of take on human form, but they do it as sort of like almost as like an infection process where it kind of spreads a bit like a virus, like a disease. And that's how it's able to take on all these, basically overcome all these different humans and sort of absorb them. And I think that is an interesting idea to consider when we talk about ET contact. Is it possible that maybe they're concerned about spreading some sort of disease that they might have to us, or vice versa? When we talk about killing and all that sort of thing did come up during the course of the show today. But frankly, epidemics have taken out a lot more humans than any war or anything along those lines. Any kind of violence or even natural disaster could come close to matching. When you look at the percentage of the population that was wiped out during the plague in Europe, that type of thing is a lot more serious, and they are basically, our microscopic enemies. Diseases spread by, various other earthly creatures. You get flea bites or whatever, and that's how from rats, and that's how the plague spreads. And well, there you go. it must have seemed like the end of the world to the folks who were living through it in Europe during, I guess, what the 13 and 1400s when it was spreading around. But I'm glad we don't have to face that kind of thing today. I haven't heard a guy with a cart yelling, "Bring out your dead," going down my street recently. It's been a while since I heard anything like that. So
Well, with the reports, and there's hundreds of thousands of reports out there about ETs, the contact, the experiencers, the abductees, talking about levitation, telepathy, all kinds of incredible powers these ETs have to go about doing their research or whatever it is they're doing. That there's such a distinction between them and us, and the really primitive tools we use today. It's almost, I think, fruitless to consider using weapons against ETs. There's also reports that they shut down, they being ETs, shut down nuclear plants or the possibility of nuclear weapons. And do you have any input on that?
Yeah, I do know that there is a school of thought floating around out there about the telepathy end of things, and I'm not 100% sure that is not technology as well. They're just able to sort of plug it into us through some sort of a Wi-Fi, and it's really more of a Wi-Fi thing than it is pure telepathy, like me sitting down and trying to guess which Zener card comes up next and really doing a great job of it. It seems, at least from some of the accounts, that they're so dead solid, intense, and so dead solid accurate that telepathy seems to me like somewhat of a hazier thing. I think we do have those capabilities, but it's a little bit hazier. It's not the same as putting on a virtual reality headset and seeing yourself skiing down a hill or something along those lines. It seems to me that what they've got might be more along the lines of, again, like a Wi-Fi that allows that kind of thing, because people aren't wired up necessarily when they go through these experiences, but they're very intense. So it's almost like a techno telepathy. Let's put it that way. That's where I'm leaning towards. But again, I'm just speculating here.
Yeah, I wanted to mention one last thing, but let me just make this comment first. And that is, one of the hunters I spoke to said that there's a lot of wisdom in knowing your limitations as a human. He meant with regards to the ET presence, the possible limitations of yourself, and the profound mistakes you can make with those limitations in their presence. That if there's anything you can do, communicating would be the best tool to use. Regarding the topic of aliens coming from the future, I am on the fence about that. As you know, Jim Peniston and many others are involved in this theory, actively proposing the idea that aliens are us from the future. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, I've got one caveat as far as the time-traveling human theory, and that is basically the universe will not hold still for you. If you're traveling any significant distance in time, you also have to travel a significant distance in space. Just as an example, if you wanted to travel to where you're at right now, 6 months in the future or 6 months in the past, whatever the case may be, you're also going to have to travel the Earth 93 miles away from the sun, 93 million miles away from the sun. So it's on the far side of the sun in 6 months past or future. And you're going to have to travel 186 miles through space to get to where you are 6 months in the future, 6 months in the past, right now. So that's space travel. That's a significant bit of space travel there. Getting to the moon. The moon's 250,000 miles away. You're talking 186 million miles away. That's a big distance. And again, that's not even factoring in the solar systems orbiting around the Milky Way galaxy and the movement that the galaxy is making through the universe. I wouldn't even be... I've got an idea what the parameters are, but I couldn't give you an accurate number in terms of how far you would want to travel. You could say, well, I'm only going to travel into the future or into the past, but I'm going to go and get there at the exact date we're at now. So in other words, you could only do it like, let's say you would travel from today, which is, I believe, the March the 27th, 2019. Well, I want to travel to March the 27th, 2020, or March the 27th, 2018. The Earth is still not going to be in the same spot. It's still going to have moved because, again, the solar system is orbiting around galactic center, and the galaxy itself is moving through the universe. So you still, once that caveat's out of the way, I think it's an important caveat to bring up, but once it's out of the way, then I'm as open to the time travel hypothesis as any other hypothesis. But again, you got to travel through space in order to travel through time. I don't see any way around that. The universe is not going to hold still for you while you go back in time and kill your grandfather and screw up the entire the timeline of humanity.
Well, science fiction has traditionally flirted with the idea of time travel. It's just a pattern. I know you've probably read a lot of science fiction regarding time travel. I know I have.
Yep.
It seems to be really popular. Also, wanted to mention something else, and that is science today was a pseudoscience in some respects before. I'm going somewhere with this, by the way. And that is, the thought of putting a heart in somebody, that was not even possible. That was just a fictional possibility. And now we're doing it.
Yeah.
There's actually...
that was a big deal. That was a big deal when that first happened in the late 60s, I believe it was. Mm-hmm. Dr. Barnard was the guy who did the first heart transplant.
And I'm glad you said that. And by the way, we just did that. The 60s is not that far away.
No.
No. That literally just happened. And we've been moving in leaps and bounds, science and technology-wise. So a lot of things we thought could be pseudoscience are not. Where I'm going with this is the extraterrestrials coming from the future hypothesis, which might sound like pseudoscience to some. Do you think that it could ever prove true?
There'd be one way of proving it, and that would be somebody from the future coming back and saying, "Hey, I'm from the future." That would be one way of proving it.
Well, we did have one guy who's part of that legend regarding coming from the future. I know you know who he is. I think he first came on Art Bell's show. He's John Teeter. And as you know, during the early 2000s, he went on several bulletin boards claiming to be a military time traveler from 2036. And he had a lot of interesting things to say. I listened to him repeatedly, the same show over and over again. And, one thing he said that I don't think anybody really noticed is he said, in the future, we use acronyms a lot. And whether he was really from the future or not, I just thought that was interesting. Like, how would he have known that? But then again, a lot of people can make claims and happen to be right about stuff like that.
Yeah, you guess about enough things, you're inevitably going to be right about something.
Yeah, I think it was actually just my little conspiracy theory about that is it was just a project put together by some college students to see how people would react.
Could be.
Yeah, but do you remember that story?
I do not. I did not pay close attention to that. I am familiar with the name, though.
Yeah, a lot of people got deeply involved in that topic. Do you think that time travel is happening, Frank? Let me just, is it, do you think that it's actually happened on this planet?
Well, one way it does every day, every second of every day.
Right.
but yeah, I don't think so. But it's possible. It's possible. Whether you like the time travel theory or the ET theory, we know the kind of distances between here and even the nearest star, and the time dilation issue, where if you're traveling even close to the speed of light and you can get to another star system within a reasonable amount of time, in terms of your time, the time back on your home planet is moved into another eon. By the time you got back, everybody you know, maybe even your entire civilization is gone. It's dead. So what's the point? You couldn't practically go there, at least as far as we can figure out, and bring back any data. You would just have to do it sort of for your own experience. And that's one of the things that Professor Kevin Knuth has been talking about. He talked about it here on the show last summer. He talked about it at the SCU conference. You would have to have like a nomadic society in order to make this kind of thing work. That's his idea. Now, Dr. Eric Davis, who works with Hal Puthoff and is involved with To the Stars Academy, he has come up with a theory that traversable wormholes are possible that get around the time dilation issue. It's not only the distances, but I think time dilation is an issue too. But we will see. We will see as we go along. But it's getting to the point now where I have to move along too, and we're going to have to wrap this up, Chant.
Yes,
but
thank you
again,
so much for your time today. I really appreciate it. And one thing I want to mention to listeners is keep up with us regarding Dr. Masters, because we have another interview with him on April 28th at noon Eastern Time. And I'm hoping
there's a whole big can of worms we didn't really have time to get to. I've got it in the plug with the scientific journal industry. He's got some interesting things to say about that. And I've got some interesting questions for him in terms of sort of armchair people like myself, like a lot of you listening out there who like to take a stab once in a while and get a little bit adventuresome in terms of our reading and take a look at some of these scientific papers. I can get through a little bit of them, especially the abstracts. The abstracts usually don't present too much difficulty, and a lot of times it's a lot better to go to the direct source. I'm a big fan of that sort of thing, and go to the scientific journals rather than read the exaggerated newspaper article about what's in the scientific paper. It's a lot better to go to the original source and get the straight scoop, at least in my opinion, whenever possible. So.
Well, I look forward to talking to our guest again on April 28th regarding his passion about the possibility of time travel and ETs. So thank you very much for today.
Oh, hey, Chant, I know you booked us another interview.
Yes.
So it's a pretty good get. So why don't you tell the folks about that before we get out of here?
Yes. I had a wonderful opportunity to get a guest with us who will not go on any other talk show except for ours. Her name is Chase Kletsky, and she just resigned recently from MUFON as the Director of Investigations. She spent a very long time there. She's done a lot of work regarding the topic of ufology and other phenomena. She has a brilliant future that she's going to continue working towards. And she left in an extremely positive manner with the organization, is what she relayed to me. And she wants to be able to share that information, and also the fact that she wants to continue on with efforts she didn't get to concentrate on as much before, and that is lobbying on behalf of the topic of ufology and all of us really in Washington. There's a lot more. But I'll just leave it at that.
She mentioned something called the Capital Club, and we're going to have to find out more about that and who's involved with that.
Also, it's important for people to understand the fiction from reality. And she's going to go into that regarding how her life appeared to turn to fiction one day, and she wants to let everybody know the reality of it. That's really key for her. And then lastly, that interview will be this Sunday, and it will be at 10 a.m. Mountain Standard Time. I believe that is going to be...
That's 1 a.m. East Coast time.
Right. And that interview is actually going to be one of the most listened to show, not only by other people, but other talk show hosts. So that's going to be interesting. So I look forward to that wonderful opportunity.
Yeah, thanks for booking that. That's a good get for us. So yeah, I'm going to get out of here. I've got the rest of my day to get along with. Chant, thanks for everything. Thanks for booking this show and that one on Sunday. And we'll keep this going and hopefully maintain the kind of shows that we've been doing. I've had a blast doing them. The feedback I get is they're good shows to listen to. So we're very grateful and thankful for having an audience. But I got to be honest, I'm enjoying the show so much. If nobody listened, I would still do it. So,
yeah, same,
but again, thanks for listening, everybody.
Thank you.
Yeah, have a great day. Bye bye now.
Bye.